Do you remember back in chapter 25, there was that serious sin where the men of Israel began to indulge in sexual sin with the women of Moab. And as a result, God sent a plague wiping out all those in Israel who had indulged in that sin. Judgment had fallen on the Israelites. But it takes two to tango, right? And the Midianites and the Moabites were guilty as well. And so this then is the chapter when judgment falls upon them for their part in that sin. Now, if you've read it, you will know that this is a troubling chapter, isn't it? Here we see the judgment of God falling upon people. And that makes us, as sinners, feel uneasy, to say the least. Now, sometimes, in light of that uneasiness, people try to redefine or reshape God. They say things like, I don't believe in a God who would ever judge this or that or the other, but we don't have the right to remake God in our own image, according to our own sensibilities. When we try to do that, the actions of God in the Bible make no sense to us. If God is this heavenly grandfather who smiles at our sin and pats us on the head, then the judgment of God, which is spoken about throughout the Bible, will make little to no sense to us whatsoever. However, if God is, as the Bible declares, holy, 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 then the judgment of God makes perfect sense, and it's the mercy of God that should cause us to kind of scratch our heads in surprise. And so in verse 3 we read, "Arm some of your men to go to war against the Midianites, so that they may carry out the Lord's vengeance on them." So, if the wages of sin is death, and these people have sinned, you would expect God's judgment to sweep them all through the veil of death, so that the next thing that happens in their lives is that they would stand before God and answer for their actions directly. That is what you would expect, but that is not what you get. One group in particular is spared from the judgment, and they are the virgin women. Now, remember back in chapter 25, the cause of this catastrophe was the sexual sin of the women in ensnaring the Israelite men. Those who are virgins in chapter 31, by definition, did not take part in that sin in chapter 25. The Bible here is making a provision for those virgin women to possibly marry the Israelite men. Now, at this point, some people try to make the case that the Bible is advocating for sexual slavery here. Now, I can imagine why someone might make that mistake because they don't know the other laws in the Bible that the Israelites already know apply to this kind of a situation. Now, my intention here is not to explain everything the Bible says about slavery or Old Testament conquest, though I do hope to do those kinds of videos one day in the future, perhaps. But here are just a few things that will help us understand what the Israelites already understand within this context. Firstly, they know, and we ought to know from reading the law, that the appropriate place for sexual relationship is within the covenant of marriage. Anytime it happens outside of marriage, it is wrong. If they both agree to it, it's either the sin of fornication or adultery, and if one party does not agree to it, it's the sin of rape, which is so serious that it carries the death penalty under Old Covenant law. So, is the Israelite man here permitted to do what he wants to one of these virgins? No. So clearly, the answer is no. Deuteronomy 21 is the chapter that governs behavior towards these female captives from war, and it says quite clearly that if no marriage takes place, this woman is free to go wherever she wants to go. He must not sell her or treat her as a slave, since he has dishonored her. As in, he has let her down. He's plucked her out of her culture and failed to win her to his, and so she is free to go. Now, this is an unheard of level of freedom and dignity in the ancient world, by the way. No other culture has a comparative code of conduct. Now, there is a legitimate question about who exactly can trigger this freedom clause, if you want to think of it like that. Deuteronomy 21 only mentions that if he is not pleased with her, she is to go free. What if this woman does not want to marry the Israelite man? Well, again, I refer you to the existing Israelite framework. You cannot force anyone into marriage. It is a mutual covenant relationship, and you cannot force anyone into bed. To do so would incur the death penalty. And so in practice then, a woman's refusal to marry renders the union displeasing because the union requires unity and consent and not force. Now, obviously, lots more could be said about this, and if you think that a short section in a short video doesn't explain this to your satisfaction, you know what, I completely understand, and in fact, I agree. But the aim of this video is not to explain everything comprehensively. As we close, I just want you to consider the fact that some people, not all, but some, would not much like the Canaanite culture that they grew up in, a culture that delighted in atrocities that would turn your stomach. And perhaps they saw these invading Israelites with their code of conduct as those who ultimately were rescuing them out of a culture that was utterly corrupt and desperately dangerous. Could it be that this salvation that is offered through relationship, covenant relationship, is actually what some of these women wanted? Of course, if they didn't want it, they didn't have to have it. They are free to go, as we've established. But if they wanted this rescue and this relationship, it was right there for the taking. Well, by the way, that is true for you and me, isn't it? We are those who have been raised in a pretty Canaanite culture. And we have a choice now. Do we turn from that life of sin and seek relationship with our rescuer, who didn't take the lives of others in order to rescue us, but gave his own life in order to rescue us, and invites us to enjoy eternal relationship with him?